The Handprints for Change Teacher Education Handbook was developed to assist teachers to support handprint action learning in a local context. Working with teachers, we explored how handprint action learning can be activated with learners as an expansion of conventional subject teaching. And this enabled us to develop some practical lesson planning tools for expanding teaching and learning to include ethics-led handprint care approach. Now, the key here is the concept of planning action learning together. And this is the starting point that we would recommend to all teachers. And the focus area for lesson planning has been mapped out in the book. So this starts in Chapter 1, looking at the context, heritage, and history. And here, the situated learning in a context in relation to the history, intergenerational work, and heritage is really the heart of the matter for a handprint care approach. Next, of course, is the ethic of care and the deliberative inclusion of an ethic of care is really important and is opened up in Chapter 3. Next, the matters of concern, often the starting point presented as issues and problems. But the co-defining of matters of concern is what we found that was really important in the work on a handprint approach. Next, the real-world startup story, where everything tends to start, and sourcing real-world stories, developing them for story sharing, a startup, is covered in chapters 4 and 5. Next, working with competencies, the competencies specified in the curriculum and the competencies for education for sustainable development. And these can be integrated, and this question is covered in Chapter 8. Next, a balanced approach. A balanced approach around ethics, issues, and heritage is what we found came out of our work with teachers, and making this selection is an important part of a lesson planning sequence. Then, of course, we get into mapping out the lesson planning sequences, and here this is covered in Chapter 5 and Chapter 7, and throughout the handbook we use the 4-quadrant progression. Finally, the important aspect of task assessment for and of learning. And here, this is a central part where there are tools in the handbook in Chapter 9. So the whole idea of this handbook is that it's a practical guide that you can work with in any way that you choose. It's not a recipe, and all of these areas will not be relevant for every lesson, but it's very useful to look at these areas as important areas that we need to give consideration as teachers if we're going to be supporting learners in the handprint endeavors that are close to their hearts and important for their futures.